Sports Finder community. We're back with our regular segment where we speak to great people from the world of sport. And today it is no different. I have Mr. Jason Kehler from Orange Coast College. Jason, welcome to the show, buddy. How are you? How's things?
Things are good. Thanks for having me today. Just trying to sort things out, get our student athletes, keeping moving forward in class and ready to go if we get to compete anytime soon.
Absolutely. And there's never been a tougher time to do such a what is regarded a very normal task.
Right.
Absolutely. So Jason, before we get into what you do day to day and so on, take me back in time. Who were you as a young man at school?
In school, I had a little bit of a different career trajectory. I was actually in school to go for sports journalism. I was hoping to do some sports journalism, and back in high school, I wrote for the school newspaper and was the sports editor, and ended up being the editor in chief. And then when I got to Cal State Fullerton, where I did my undergrad, I wrote for the Daily Titan. And eventually, towards the end of my 4 years of working on my degree, I started to kind of think that that wasn't really the route for me. And during an internship with a local newspaper, I met the sports information directors at Azusa Pacific University in Cal Poly Pomona. And I thought, wow, that's sports information sounds pretty neat, doing more PR just for one set of teams rather than a whole region of teams. And that's what got me into California Community College. I took an internship with Santa Ana College in their sports information department. And as luck would have it, the sports information director at the time took a different job in the district. And before I knew it, I was named the interim sports information director, and I ultimately applied for the job and got hired full time. And I did that for 10 years. And in the process, I got more interested in athletic administration, and that's how I eventually got into being an athletic director. But it all started with journalism and just having an interest in sports and writing about sports, and that opened the door, and I just kind of kept going from there.
What sport did you play growing up?
So I had a really famous failed season of baseball as a kid, and eventually, by the time I hit high school, I was a little taller than everybody, so the basketball coach got a hold of me, and but I was playing football was my interest, and so I played football and eventually started playing basketball and ended up being a little better at basketball than I was at football, and I played that through high school. But I was, I don't know that I would have even been good enough to be considered to go on from there, but I hadn't even thought about it either. I was just at the time still thinking about journalism. But those were my two main sports that I played.
Wow. What college did you attend? Talk to me about that whole journey and how you got into the college you did, and what was life like post college?
Yeah, so I went to Cal State Fullerton, and the reason why I went to Cal State Fullerton was for journalism. I remember going to a journalism academy, and there was like a roundtable discussion, and someone at the table said, if you're serious about journalism, you go to USC, but if you can't afford USC, you go to Cal State Fullerton. And so I was like, okay, that's 20 minutes from my house. That makes a lot of sense. And so that's how I ended up at Cal State Fullerton. And then life after, I ended up at Santa Ana College shortly after graduating through the internship, and just went right into working full time in community college athletics. And that's really that 15 years later, that's still, what I'm doing day in and day out, and loving every moment of it.
Amazing. I mean, one of my questions is basically if NIL was an option in your time, how would you have monetized? Let's say you were in a situation as an athlete, right? And you had the option to monetize on your NIL. How would Jason Kehler sit down and strategize a plan to monetize his NIL? Because this is going to be happening very soon. And there's a lot of talk and guidance coming from everywhere. But I think there's no better guidance than the people who've been in this industry their whole life, and they've seen transitions and changes of the industry evolving and developing over time.
That's a great question, and it's a hard one to answer because while I still like to think it wasn't that long ago, so much has changed in terms of NIL, which has made it such a a forefront topic, and really that's social media. And I I didn't have a Facebook account until after I got out of college, and I didn't even know what it was until after I got out of college. I think MySpace was still the social media platform of choice at the time. And so, at that point, I mean, I think it's still traditional. It would still be traditional advertising at that point, trying to become the face of a product. You're back to Jordan with Gatorade and Nike and stuff like that. That's hard because I think so much of marketing oneself today um, is geared around social media and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and the influence side of everything. So it's progressed so much because of the media that it progressed with, I think.
Absolutely. Um, what's your biggest advice to students looking to monetize on their NIL? Like, basically, everybody's going to be telling them how to monetize, but what should they watch out for? Like, what are the no-nos?
I've sat in on a couple of the NIL discussions that the 3C2A is leading right now. And one of the things they talked about, was just bad deals and bad contracts. And I think that's, making sure that they're not getting themselves into a contract that could negatively affect them. But then also being aware of, if it's a brand or being an influencer for a brand, thinking about the long term the long term view or impact that can have. One of the things that I talk to our student athletes a lot about, I've been doing this talk for probably 10 years now, is being aware of when you put something on social media, it doesn't belong to you anymore. And so how is that going to look in 10, 15, 20 years? Once it's out there, and you're not getting it back. And so that would, I think, be the biggest advice is be aware of of what you're representing, if it's a brand that you're representing, and what that might look like to you later on down in life when maybe you're trying to get a job or you're starting your family. Not to say that anybody's going out and representing anything super negative, but something like that. Things like I said, something you put on the internet, it doesn't belong to you once it's out there.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where people nowadays are basically sharing their whole lives on the internet without the thought process or the consideration that a lot of it can come back to haunt them professionally, their family, makes them vulnerable. This is a lot what people are missing out on, and it's really really sad to see. Um, moving on to our next point, do you believe that? I mean, so let's talk about the whole monetization process of student athletes, sorry, and their NIL. Like, out of the 600,000 plus student athletes that compete in the college sporting realm, like, only a small percentage would be really basically able to really monetize on their social followings. I mean, then what happens to the other 90% or 95%? Because to me, if you look down now the list, you'll be lucky to get 5,000 students that have a decent enough following to actually monetize. So are we building, are we changing all these rules and legislations to help 5,000 students, or like, where's this going?
Yeah, that's a good question. And going back to some of those meetings I sat in on, there was a report given as to like California community college athletes specifically, and what it could look like for them. And it was interesting because the range was something like on Twitter on the low end 1,000 a year to 40,000 a year, 50,000 a year. And I'm thinking, man, someone at the California community college, has the reach to garner $50,000 annual income from social media. They did say that a lot of that was due to Laney College with Netflix's Last Chance U. So there were a handful of
Yeah.
athletes that were a little more
John
elevated.
Beam. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think to answer your question though, I mean, you know, even on that low end of, you know, if a student's able to find a way to turn it into $1,000 to $5,000, I mean, that could make a significant impact for a student athlete who, you know, that's the reality of it. They're in school full time. California community college athletes, they have to work, most of them, you know, and so there's really limited time. You know, maybe this gives them an opportunity to not have to work, you know, at a at a local fast food restaurant or something, and have a little more time to focus on their studies and on their athletics. So um, you know, it's, to me, it's one of those things where so much of our rules are geared around the concept of, if it's available to the general student population on your campus, then it should be available to the student athlete. And I think that's where this falls into it. It's really no different to me. And so, you know, I can see, I get your point. It makes sense. You know, there's a handful that are standing to potentially make a really good profit off of it, but you know, for the rest, if they can make a little bit extra, you know, that just helps them that much more.
And if they're intelligent enough, they can build their own brands based on the sport they play and really grow that. Awesome. Do you think this also adds a few more years to their student athlete journey post college? Because now they've built this following during college. They can basically take the following with them and then transition into that wise guy who's been through the process that can help you get through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what a lot of it is, at least on our level. I don't, not to say that no one's going to be able to build a brand off of being a community college athlete, but I think a lot of them realistically are making their brand for a different reason. And so, you know, if I always talk about, that's the beauty of community college athletes. You know, some of them are D1 talent that need to improve their academics. Some of them are really good students that need to get a little better athletically. And some of them are just looking to play for a couple more years at a competitive level. We have such a wide range of athletes. And so if that's an opportunity that for them to build a brand while they're doing, you know, they're playing a sport they love, and then they're able to maintain that after the fact, then I see that as a positive for them.
Absolutely. Um, Jason, you've been amazing. You've answered a ton of questions for me. Thank you very much. And last but not least, the last question that I really want to ask you is, what's the most impactful book that you've read that you would recommend to our audience?
Oh wow, that's a good question. Impactful book.
That's really
Um,
changed your life in some way, shape, or form.
oh man, this is one of those questions that you really should have off the top of your head. And the moment we get done, I'm going to think of like 5 books that I could think of right now. Um, you know, we in our athletics department, our kinesiology department, we read a lot of leadership books, and I can't think of the title of the one right now off the top of my head, that we just read it, but it might be called like Leadership Under Fire or something. But it has different chapters about different presidents. You know, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and how they led the country through times of turmoil. And the dean of our department, he was the one who recommended it to me, and we read a couple chapters together. Fittingly, it was, I want to say we read that in 2019, and then we found ourselves in 2020. You know, starting off, we lost Coach Alto, and then the pandemic hit, and it really was a year of turmoil. And we had just got done having these really good, insightful conversations about leadership under fire and leadership in crisis. And so that's the one that popped in my mind. I just unfortunately can't think of the title right now.
That's all right. I mean, we can find it later and just put it in the actual show notes, and people can then access it. Jason, thank you very much. You've been amazing. Thank you for the book recommendation, the NIL insights, and once again, keep doing the great work that you guys are doing, looking after all these athletes. And thank you very much for joining me on the Sports Finder podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.